Whilst I was organising the studio last week, turning it into this, I was moving some of my older projects up into the attic. I came across a couple of those travel editions of board games, Mini Monopoly and Travel Battleships, and this kind of gave me an idea. So let's reduce those ranges and magnetise those minis for the roll. I've built plenty of different terrain pieces for D&D encounters over the years, each one bigger than the last. Whilst I love this terrain and find it great for building a scene, transporting those to these places that we host our games can sometimes be a bit of a pain, taking up multiple boxes worth. So why not copy this concept of the travel-sized board game and make tiny travel D&D? I wanted to start this build by thanking Matt from RP Archive for his video on making magnetic tiles, as this was a perfect solution for my plan for tiny travel D&D. I've linked his video in the description below. To make the magnetic terrain paste, I followed Matt's video. I picked up some brown tile grout from my local hardware store and ordered a bag of reduced iron powder online. The iron powder is what will make the mini boards magnetic, while still allowing us to shape and colour the terrain as needed, the same as what we would do for a normal board build. The last base ingredient that we'll need is PVA glue. The next thing I thought about were the boards themselves. The travel board games were made from injection moulded plastic, covering a magnetic sheet so that the pieces with small magnets inside them would stick. I wanted my maps to be flexible, thin, and taking up as little space as possible. I knew the traditional thin sheets of MDF or thick cardstock wouldn't be enough for this, so I instead settled on plasticard sheets. Once again, you can pick these up online should you wish to, but if you happen to have a filament 3D printer, I've also created an STL file that you can download for free that will give you what you need. One face is flat and the other is textured, to look like Treadplate, as I'd struggled to get hold of this in the past, and I thought it might be quite useful, especially for another more grimdark or futuristic build. To start with, take an old mixing tub and mix together one part of the tile grout with one part of the reduced iron powder. Once thoroughly mixed, take a second mixing pot and pour a small amount into the mixing pot with PVA glue. The reason for having a second mixing pot is so that you can gradually add more of the powder as to give you then the right consistency. A good gauge for the mixture is so that it's thick enough so that it's fully saturated, but you can still see elements of the powder. To save us having to paint our base layer later, you can then add some pigment powder to the mixture to give you the right colour. In this case, I used a light rust colour, and whilst it was bright when it went in, the saturation was brought down nicely and mixed well with the grout iron mixture to give us a dirt and mud look. If you have any excess grout iron mixture, you can store it in these sauce pots that you can pick up from your local dollar, euro or pound stores and save it for later projects. Taking our plastic sheet, we can pour the mixture into the centre and using a coffee stirrer, old paintbrush or scalping tool, spread the mixture evenly across the surface. You shouldn't need more than a thin layer to make this work well. If you've printed your own sheet, the tread plate on the top is actually a great depth gauge for a good thickness. Make sure that you give yourself a thick enough layer to cover that tread plate and you're done. If you've got lines in your mixture from spreading like I have here, you can take a paper towel dipped in isopropyl and smooth out the lines. The iso will prevent the mixture from sticking to the paper towel and won't react with the iron that's in the mixture like water could. Once you're happy, put this aside to dry and then have a bit of a spring clean of your station if it ends up a little messy like mine has here. Whilst you're waiting for this to dry, if you have any of the wet mixture left over, you might as well put this to good use by making some more magnetic terrain pieces. Using some XPS foam offcuts, use your finger or a knife to rip off chunks, giving you a basic rock-like texture and shape, leaving the bottom flat face untouched. You can then coat the rock with the mixture on all sides but the bottom. Once dry, you can paint to your desired colours. As a quick build, I just gave these a quick dry brush of a light grey and a white just to edge highlight. To finish off the rocks, you can use a hot glue gun and melt a small hole at the bottom and then glue in a small magnet. I'm using a 5x2mm neodymium magnet as these are relatively cheap to buy in bulk, are small but are also still powerful enough to make this work for what we're looking for. The next pieces for some magnetic terrain that we can make very simply are some trees for a forest map. I picked up some of these 9cm trees online. A bag of 20 cost around £14 or $18, a little pricey for a one-off cost, but less than $1 each. The details are actually really good. For the scale that I want, these felt like they were a little too tall, so just using some nippers, I cut off the bottoms that would have normally been used to punch holes into a foam. The next point was simply to attach magnets to the bottom of the trees, using superglue. Once these are dry, just paint to match. The next, and most important part for any map I feel, is the D&D minis themselves. The easiest and cheapest way to get tiny D&D minis that work well for these maps is to simply print off some small circular images of your character classes or characters themselves. There are plenty of resources online for this, as well as many talented commission artists in the community, so reach out. Defining scale for creature sizes: small creatures use a 5mm diameter magnet, mediums use a 10mm magnet, large are on a 15 and huge are on a 25mm base. Now, a set of hole punches work really well for this and allow you to use smaller magnets on larger creatures by punching out the same size cardstock or plastic card to support the paper mini printouts. Alternatively, if you're lucky enough to have a resin 3D printer, you can always source some great models online for free, which you can then rescale down to a 10mm size. The baseline for this is to have any medium-sized humanoid creature at a total height of 10mm, and then scale everything else, such as large creatures or buildings, to match. You can also then print bases to match that can then hold magnets in the bottom. Whilst I paint these up, I want to let you know about Wayland Games. Many hobbyists in the UK would have already heard of Wayland Games for providing such a huge discount of up to 20% on so many big hobby titles such as Lego, Gunpla, D&D, Magic, Warhammer, and a huge range of board games and hobby supplies. Shipping in the UK is really fast, but they also ship worldwide with really fast delivery. I've been using Wayland Games for many years now, and it's always my first stop simply because they always have the best prices, especially for those Warhammer fans out there. Wayland haven't sponsored this video, but they have given me an affiliate link to give to my viewers, so if you happen to be shopping for hobby supplies and products and want a great discount, as well as then supporting the channel at no extra cost to yourselves, use the link in the video description below. I also want to take the chance to thank each and every one of you that supported the channel, either through watching these videos, subscribing to the channel, using the affiliate links, or being part of the very special group of rollers that make up our Patreon, such as the channel producer, Danny H. You all give me the chance to keep making these videos, and it's a privilege to do so. If you're considering supporting the channel by becoming a Patreon member, you'll get access to a bunch of goodies, such as monthly STL faction-inspired combat gauges and dice dispensers, as well as monthly prize draws, and access to the private Discord server where you'll find me and the amazing community that we've built, the link for which is in the description below. Now that we have some scattered terrain and minis to fill our tiny board, we can bring back the base to detail it to fit our desired landscape. I'm going for a simple forest in this map, and so I'm adding a light flock to match. Covering the top with a layer of PVA glue, we can then flock the piece with a fine base-ready ground cover, being careful to remove any larger stones or clumps that wouldn't work with the scale that we've used. We can then lock all this in with a homemade sealer solution made up of 1 part PVA, 1 part isopropyl alcohol, and 5 parts water. Once again, leave this to dry, locking everything in place. can make so many different landscapes really easily, such as a forest or grassland, a muddy town or a desert, and a snowy tundra all work with just a few pieces of terrain that we've made in this video. Another great benefit to the rocks that we've made is that the minis themselves don't actually roll off regardless of how they're perched. Even the rocks themselves stack on each other without falling off. Once again, I wanted to thank Matt over at RP Archive for the knowledge to make this video work. If you aren't already familiar with his channel, Matt makes some incredibly detailed guides on how to make some great D&D terrain. One of my first terrain builds for my campaign were actually his magnetic street tiles. If you're interested to know, the scale that we've been using in this video is epic scale, so many wargaming fans out there might be able to put some of these techniques to use. I'll be covering this in the future, but until then, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.